Since we know that your time is valuable and you have set a lot of time aside for us today because this is a very important topic. So we want to welcome you to this program of the University of Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center. We are so pleased to be able to bring you these educational programs to help support small businesses in the region and the state. Please be advised that we will be recording this workshop for ASBTDC purposes. I will introduce our presenters momentarily. In the meantime, I'm Amy Robinson, and I'd like to also introduce my co-facilitators, Chris Case. Chris, say hello. And Catherine Corley. Say hello, Catherine. We also have some other ASBTDC consultants and specialists with us as well, because in addition to being here to support you, we learn just as much as you do through these programs. And if you're not familiar with the ASBTDC, it is a one-stop shop for startups and existing small businesses. We are affiliated with a statewide ASBTDC, as well as a national network of more than 1,000 business centers. And locally, we offer free one-on-one consulting workshops like this one. We cover relevant topics for business owners. And if you're not already a client and benefiting from our services, we encourage you to visit us at sbtdc.uark.edu. So you are part of a workshop. I'm about to enter something into the chat, some information for you to keep in mind and go over. So I'm going to do that now, wherever that chat is. And here you go. And I'm about to cover this as well. So this is a workshop format. We are bringing you Starting a Business in Arkansas with Lori Lieblong of the ASBTDC, Cal Rose with Wright Lindsey Jennings. Say hello, everybody. Eileen Jennings, who is not related, is with Arvest Bank. This is a workshop format, and we are going to keep it as close to our in-person workshops as possible. There will be a poll here popping up momentarily, and we would love for you to take it. And what we are asking you is going to be some information that will be really helpful for our presenters. So if you'll take a moment while I give you some instructions to answer those 4 questions. There is also a link to participate to a participant workshop in the chat. Feel free to click on that and fill that out as we go, because we want this to be an interactive workshop. So you are welcome, and we encourage you to keep your video on, interact with questions as if you are here in person. The thing that will be slightly different is navigating technology. If you're not already completely familiar with Zoom or completely zoomed out, you know that you can unmute, and then your screen will light up and we will know that you are there. You can also do a good old-fashioned ahem, I have a question. Please utilize chat as much as possible. You can chat and fill in questions as we go along. Chris and Catherine and I will be monitoring those, so we will look at your questions, and if you don't want to ask that yourself, we will pitch that to the presenters. You can also use the raise hand feature that you can enable if you click on participants. You can put any questions to us about how to use the technology or any other questions that come along in the chat. So go ahead and continue filling out that survey. About 65% of you have voted, but again, it will be very helpful, and we will share it with our presenters here momentarily. So just take another moment and let us know about yourself and what industry you're in, and how we can help you today. So without further delay, I would love to kick it off with Lori Lieblong of the ASBTDC. Will you get us started? She sure will. Remember to unmute, Lori. Yeah, you're still on mute. That's okay.
Okay, can everyone hear me and see the Starting a Business in Arkansas slide?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. So my name is Lori Lieblong, and I am one of the consultants here at the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center. So you're all here for Starting a Business in Arkansas. I know I encourage some of my small business clients to come. Most of you are either thinking about starting a business or have already begun the process of starting a business. We hope that this seminar will give you some of the steps that you need to take and help you have a roadmap for how to get there. We are part of the Office of Economic Development here at the University of Arkansas, and we are funded by that part of the University of Arkansas, and also funded by the Small Business Administration. Our two center sponsors are Arvest Bank, and so you're going to hear from Eileen Jennings, who was introduced earlier, who is a commercial lender at Arvest Bank, and you're also going to hear from Cal Rose, who is a small business attorney with Wright Lindsey Jennings. So a little bit more about the ASBTDC. We help our clients in 3 ways. One is through training and workshops like the one you're here for today. We also offer workshops on marketing, social media, search engine optimization, Google. We also offer training on COVID-19 financing, franchising, buying and selling businesses, QuickBooks, a variety of other topics that are relevant for small business owners. We really try to listen to the questions that we're being asked by our small business clients and develop programming around those questions that we're being asked. We also help clients with our market research. I worked in the corporate world for 10 years before working in this role, helping small businesses. And I worked for companies that paid a lot of money for valuable market research. And some of the information that we're able to give our small business clients is very similar to the research that I worked with in large corporations. So as part of our consulting, we're able to deliver that to our clients, and it can help you identify your target markets, make location decisions, as well as better understand your industry. And so that's a really valuable information that we give to our clients. And probably the most valuable thing we do for clients is the one-on-one consulting. We help people prepare to obtain financing by helping people write business plans as well as prepare financial projections. We also help people with marketing consulting. We can help you with social media, develop marketing strategies. We help people with QuickBooks. We help people with accounting and financing. What I always tell people if I meet someone at a networking event or out, somebody that owns a small business, is just come in, talk to us about whatever your business problem is, and then we will figure out how and who we can help you solve it. Our consulting services are really broad in scope, so don't think of us as operating in silos. Just come in and talk to us about whatever problem you're having, and then we'll determine in what way we can be of service to you. So on today's agenda, first, we're going to talk about how you determine if your business idea is feasible. A lot of times I get clients that are ready to set up an LLC or ready to develop a logo or ready to take that step. And I say, let's take a step back and figure out if this business idea is really something that's going to make sense financially. I think most of us are probably looking to start businesses because we want to put food on the table or take vacations or develop some kind of financial means in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So we're going to talk about determining whether or not your business is actually a viable idea. Then we're going to talk about developing a business plan using the ASBTDC business plan format. Then we'll talk about some of the other considerations that you need to think about when starting a small business. Then Cal from Wright Lindsey Jennings will talk to you about some of the legal and tax issues that you need to think about when starting a small business. And then Eileen Jennings from Arvest is going to talk to you about financing. So we've got some experts here that will address those topics. So is your business idea feasible? You're going to think about the market, management, and money. So I spent 10 years in the corporate world, and the last 5 of which I spent in the vitamin industry before this. And so I like to interweave examples from a project or business that I worked on in that scenario into this presentation because it's got some good examples that are really straightforward. And so I like to do that. Specifically, I worked in the vitamin business on a national drugstore chain. And we found in our consumer research that customers found some food attributes like preservative-free, organic, all-natural, those types of food attributes also attractive in vitamins and supplements. I was working on a national drugstore chain, and we found that our customers who were buying hairspray, shampoo, conditioner, and other health and beauty products were in fact buying specialty vitamins at specialty retailers like GNC and Vitamin Shop. And so we wanted to capture incremental sales by getting those people who are buying their health and beauty products in our store to buy vitamins in our store. So we launched a line of vitamins that featured those attributes found in food in vitamins. So preservative-free, organic, all natural. So I give you that information on the front end. So when I use examples going through this presentation, you have the story up front.
Lori, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to, and I think that'll be really helpful for what you're about to launch into. If I go ahead and share the poll results, is this a great time for us to do that?
Sure.
Kind of have an idea. Okay. So the poll results are very interesting, and we want to make sure that you all have opportunity to put in the chat anything that you don't think is represented here. Arts and entertainment is a huge piece of people that we have here today, and so if you have a very specific arts or entertainment business that you're looking at and you want to put that in the chat, we'd probably very much love to know what that is. We also have a few people who've said that the industries that we have listed are not listed that you are in, or that you feel that you're in. So please go ahead and put some of those companies or those industries in the chat so that we can review that. Quick question on what phase of business planning you are in. Have not started, just an idea was the majority. We've got 41%. Have done some research is almost equal at 38%, and we've got about 20% of people are ready to go. And then last but not least, or two more, have you formed a legal entity? Majority say no. And then does your business have or will need a lease? Mostly no, and some maybe not sure yet. So information for all of you, and we can revisit that poll a little bit later. But I just wanted to make sure you all had that. And I also want everyone who is in participating today to go ahead and put your industry or any other information that you feel like we need to know about your company. Thanks for letting me interrupt, Lori. I appreciate it.
No, that's helpful. I will try. I've not worked in the arts and entertainment industry a whole lot in this role. I've worked some retail and some other businesses. So I'll try to draw some examples since that's 55% of the customer base. I'll try to pull some examples through this, but I'll probably draw from most of my experience. But I will try to pull some examples that might be helpful for that base, since we've got such a huge chunk of people that are coming from that industry. But industry driving forces. So in the vitamin example, we know that for a lot of Americans, obesity and unhealthy lifestyles are still a driver of chronic illnesses. However, you've got a lot of Americans that are taking proactive approaches to living healthier lifestyles. So people are eating healthier, like we talked about those food attributes and food trends, and people are exercising more. So that drives demand for products and services like vitamins. If we think about the arts and entertainment industry, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. One of the biggest players that are suffering in COVID-19 right now are wedding venues, movie theaters, things like that. So that's an example of an industry because of trends in, I guess pandemics would fall into like the health industry because of that industry trend. That is a product or category that's suffering from less in demand or lower demand. So that is, I guess, a way that I could draw from that industry. In our vitamin example, we looked at competitive forces and saw that our biggest competitors were actually specialty retailer, where in most cases in this national drugstore chain, our competitive forces would have been Walgreens or Walmart or Sam's Club. But in the case of this line of vitamins, where you're going to have these special attributes, our competitors were GNC or Vitamin Shop. For wedding venues and other programs like that, your competitors might be outdoor locations or virtual events or other opportunities like that for people to gather safely. So you've got to consider all of the alternatives that may be available for people to gather. I know if we just think about the meetings that we're doing now and how we're all gathering together, I'm even seeing it for like fundraising events right now. People are doing virtual. I haven't gone to any. I used to go to a lot of the charity events. And I'm not doing any of the virtual stuff, and I haven't popped in to see what's going on with that, but I'm seeing a lot of it still happening. So virtual events are still happening. You also want to consider market size and market share. In the vitamin example, we had advanced analytics to give us a glance at the market size and market share. With our market research at the ASBTDC, we can also look at market size for our clients. We have an actual report. It's a health and beauty expenditures report, and it enables us to see how many customers are likely to purchase vitamins in a 6-month window of time for vitamins and supplements. So that number is 10,000 customers. Okay, that's a potential viable customer base for a vitamin store. If it's 500, we may not be the best place for a vitamin shop here in Northwest Arkansas, depending on the geography. We can also get a competitive listing of vitamin stores in Northwest Arkansas. If it looks like annual sales of a competitive listing is $20 million, I'm throwing out numbers. These are not numbers that I've seen. These are just for examples. If it's $20 million in vitamin sales, that's a pretty big number. A small share of that is, a worthwhile potential business. If it's $10,000, this may not be a business that you want to enter or capture any form of a share of, because it's only $10,000 out there available. So those are just some of the ways that we can help customers identify market size and share using our market research alone. But that's something you definitely want to consider. Is the industry positive for the industry you want to enter? For us, in the vitamin example, it was. People are looking to get healthier. Is it driving demand for your product or service? Well, yeah, people are taking vitamins because they're looking for preventive measures for their health. People are wanting to get away from taking prescription medications and looking for alternatives. Was the market size there? Yes, absolutely. Could we compete by creating something for these customers that were in our stores? Yes, we had the ability from a manufacturing standpoint to create products with those special attributes. Arts and entertainment. Big venues right now might be a challenge. 2 years from now, we might be in a better setting. Are there some alternative ways to get into that environment through virtual activities or outdoor activities? Possibly so. It's not to say that people don't still want entertainment or the arts. And I don't know specifically what these business ideas are. I'm just seeing that as a general industry on a poll item. But we know we're in a pandemic, and we know that we're discouraged from gathering in large groups.
Lori, you accidentally got muted. Would you re-unmute? Sorry about that.
Okay, so the next thing you want to consider is management capacity. Or I shouldn't say capacity, but management desire and capacity. As a business owner, you're responsible for getting everything done in a business or hiring it out. The reality for a lot of small business owners, and our facilitators are all small business owners, so you guys are welcome to chime in, is that for the first year or two of operations, chances may be that you're doing everything yourself. So you're doing all of the marketing. That means developing a real strategy, both brand strategy and marketing strategy, a tactical plan, and executing it, as well as developing a budget. With a large budget in a corporate job, that's a full-time job. In a small company, you may have a smaller budget, so it doesn't require a full-time job, but you have to think strategically about it, spend efficiently so you're not wasting money, and make sure that it gets done. So it's a well thought out process, and you have to do it. You have to invest in your business. If you don't enjoy doing that, it still has to be done. Can you hire an intern to do it? Yes, but you're still overseeing it. You still have to make sure that it gets done. You can't just close your eyes to it. You're also responsible for the financial side of the business. Payroll has to be paid. Bookkeeping has to be done. Taxes have to be paid. For a lot of people, this is not enjoyable. You may not be able to pay a CPA in year 1 or year 2. You might be doing the QuickBooks daily and weekly yourself. So it has to get done. So you have to ask yourself, can I do this for a couple of years before I can pay someone else to do it? Or maybe you can borrow the money to pay someone else to do it. Regardless, it has to get done. You're also always looking for ways to improve operations. I love to use the kale salad example because I love to make these really involved kale salads that I get recipes for off Pinterest. So say you're a restaurant owner in Northwest Arkansas and you make the best kale salads, and you've got this really awesome regional distributor of kale, and your margins, because of the price you're getting on kale, are just great. So you're cooking with gas, you're making these great kale salads that everybody in Northwest Arkansas loves. And you've got great margins until you talk to your chef who's like, so I'm having to throw away half the kale we get because it's wilted. And so you take a closer look and your margins aren't as good as you think they are because of this issue. And you realize you may need to go with a local producer. And in the end, your margins are improved because you've got fresher salads, more people are buying them, and you've got less spoilage. But you're always looking at issues like that, whether they're being called to your attention by a chef, like in that case, or you're just looking out for them. But constantly as a business owner, you're looking at customer service, you're looking at employee retention, you're looking at supply and demand, you're looking at all of those issues, constantly over and over reviewing the business. You're also the HR manager. If you don't like managing people, you better read some books, get some advice from other people, because you're going to be managing people. It may be a while before you're able to hire someone that does all the managing. You know, if you're in an industry where you're opening a restaurant and you don't have all the experience and you hire a general manager, you're still going to have, that's going to be managing the restaurant employees. You still have to manage that general manager. So you need to make sure that you're capable of doing that. And you also need to make sure you put the right people in the right job. So that's something that you need to ask yourself when you think about starting a business. Can I do all these things? Am I willing to do all of these things? When will I be able to afford to pay someone else to do the things that I don't want to do? But that's a lot of questions that you have to ask yourself. And then finally, you have to look at the financial picture. This is the first piece of homework that I send my clients home with when I meet with somebody for an initial consultation. Is they've got a business idea, and I say, okay, we need to look at the finances first. And this usually accompanies me having homework in the way of market research. But we take a look at the finances first. And we've created at the center a really great tool to help people gather all of the information they need to get in order for us to look at financial statements for a business. And so we look first at startup costs. So I have people just pick out whatever means they like to capture information. So if that's an Excel worksheet or a Word document or a PowerPoint slide or a big cheap tablet, whatever it may be for you, just get that means of capturing information and list out every single thing that you need to start the business, fixed one-time expenses. So that can be the piece of land to put the building on, down to the toilet paper in the bathroom, but every single expense. And then you make the phone calls to find out how much all of these expenses cost, and then transfer that information into our template. And that gives you all of your startup expenses. It's the sum of all of those things that are your startup expenses. And then we have another sheet for monthly expenses. And so we have everyone put together their monthly expenses. So it's like doing a household budget, only you're doing it for a business. Some of these are going to be difficult to solidify on the upfront because real estate may change. Real estate, you may not know right off the bat. If you're looking at brick and mortar stores, you may have several locations you have to look at. Usually we have to have a marketing meeting to solidify a marketing plan, but we can make some estimates based on what you think, you know, a few pieces of real estate you've looked at, based on a meeting we can have to talk about a marketing plan, to make some estimates on what your monthly budget would look like from a marketing perspective, and what your startup expenses from a marketing standpoint might look like. And if you've had a few meetings with commercial real estate agents, what you could expect in terms of rent. And then we can look at your revenue projections or sales forecasts. This usually involves working with one of our consultants, getting some market research to kind of look at potential demand, and then getting information in the way of costs of products if you are selling products. And that's going to require research on your part. The combination of all of these things is going to tell us how profitable the business will be, how much you need to get started, and then you will bring to the table how much money you have to start the business. And all of this information together tells us, is this business financially viable? Is it going to make money? Is it going to have positive cash flows? Do you have the money you need to start it on your own based on what a bank is going to need? And Eileen will talk more about this. For you to get a loan. Do you have the credit that you need to have to get a loan? Do you have other investment sources like friends or family or other people that want to invest in the business? Do you have other sources of funding? You'll need to have all of that kind of laid out for the finance piece. And this enables you to see, okay, do I have the money available, the capital available, or access to capital to actually get this business started? But you first have to lay out all those cards and get all of that financial picture put out on the table before you can really answer that question. And it's really important to do this thoroughly and really lay things out specifically. And I've seen clients come to me when they're part of the way through starting a business and they haven't really kept good track of expenses. And it's really easy to spend $10, $15, $20,000 starting a business, not keeping track of it. So I've had some people contact me when they've gone through the process and maybe they don't really need financing. And it's like, okay, so maybe you don't need financing, but let's still keep track of this before you just spend $20,000 in 2 months on logos and websites and this and that. Like, let's just be mindful of what you're spending, even if you don't need to borrow it, for the simple fact that you need to keep track of your finances. So this is just a really important step to take. So once you've gone through that process, if there is in fact a market for your business, for some right now during a pandemic, it's just, you might need to wait a couple of years. I've had a few clients that I've worked with right now that in a different day, notwithstanding a pandemic, their business would be totally a viable business idea. So if there is a market for your product, in our vitamin example, these specialty vitamins were a hit. They were a great idea. So if you've taken the test of whether or not there's a market, whether you have the financial viability and the management capacity, then you can sit down and write a business plan. I get a lot of clients that come to me with a business plan because they like to write and they're excited about their idea. And I always take them back to the finances. I'm like, I can tell you're a good writer and you like to write and you want to write about your idea, but we got to look at the money. But once all of that is settled, then we can start talking about writing a business plan.
Hey, Lori.
Hey, Lori.
Can I interject? Just a quick question. Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, I was going to ask a quick question. Have you had clients that had a great idea and then once they did the financial workbook had an aha? Like what typically happens? Are they pleased with their projections or did they miss something? What's been your experience in doing the financial projections?
Usually we'll have to go back and revisit revenue projections. A lot of times people realize they need to wait and save more. Like that's been a lot. I've had a lot of conversations where it's like, okay, you're just going to have to spend, another year for saving up for a down payment. I've had conversations about people rebuilding their credit. Maybe they've had some issues with their credit, or they need to get, like I've had other clients get more funding from family members, like early inheritance, for a bigger down payment on large loans and things like that. But that's been a lot of the case. And then revisiting revenue, revisiting expenses. Okay, what can you cut? A lot of people want to quit their jobs and start working, or both spouses want to quit their job and start working. Banks, Eileen can talk about a lot of this better than I can, but a lot of times somebody wants to see you still work and start a business, that there's going to be a way to income coming in. Somebody still works and somebody is running the business. Starting a business is not a 40-hour-a-week thing. It's just not. So, so that's a lot of the conversations that we have about.
On the Lori, also in addition to those conversations, even back to the idea phase and the market research that you're doing, because we have a lot of people, 80% of the people here today either haven't really have just an idea or they've just done some research. So how often do you see the idea itself change and morph earlier on in some of that product research?
Change and morph.
Yeah, does it?
Quite a bit. I mean, I've seen, like, I'm trying to think of anybody this year that I've seen like change and morph. We've talked about like assortment changes and offerings, like for different customer groups. Like I had one client early, this is all confidential. So like without publicity releases, there's not a whole lot of like detail that I can get into about clients. So it makes it really difficult to talk specific business ideas. But I had one client this year where we talked about their assortment of offerings and how they needed to target certain customer groups differently and what that meant for their like in a corporate setting, you might talk about like distribution channels, but how they would focus on this target with this assortment and this target with like this service offering and this target with this service offering. And it just kind of shifted their business model a little bit. And like only through talking about their overall strategy and their customer groups did we get there. Like they came in with one idea And then we talked a little bit more about what they wanted to do and what they're capable of doing, and like just talked through their business idea a little bit more and got it a little bit better defined. So that happens a lot, I could feel like, because a lot of times people have an idea and maybe they bounced it off. Because here's the thing, and business owners would be better to say this: your friends and your family are going to tell you your idea is great. Like they're like, that's an awesome idea. Like we're not friends or family. We're going to sit down and say, well, here's this. And I mean, we're not mean people, but we're going to sit down and take it through this process and have this objective view on something. And, it's our job to go through a process.
Fantastic. Well, and just so you know, we have had a few people chime in on the chat about the more specific arts and entertainment industry. And this is for everyone. We've got local food imports, photography, artist support services, ceramics, e-commerce and gaming. So it's a huge variety, but I love that, for any business idea and any industry, walking through the process and having you as an objective sounding board is a really huge deal. So thank you. And then they can develop their business plan.
Yes, and what I would like to say, what I always say before starting this segment of the seminar is, so you have to have a business plan and financial projections to get a loan, or an SBA loan for sure. But I have anyone that comes to me write a business plan, and I've never had somebody say, well, that was a waste of time. Like never once have I had anyone say that was a waste of my time, that was useless or anything. Most people thank me for having done it, because it forces you to really think through, just like the client I was just talking about, how we like refined some of their customer targets, refined some of their assortment, all of that. So even if you don't need funding, you're going to fund it yourself. The process that you go through to write a business plan is still a really valuable one. So when I have people working with me, I just really encourage it. If you're starting a business, certainly not something you have to do. If you want to borrow money, you do. But I encourage anyone that's starting a business to go through the process. If you really know your stuff and you really, want to start a business, it shouldn't be that difficult.
And Lori, so they want to know, how do they do that? How do they work with ASBTDC, and does it cost?
It's free. You pay your taxes.
We are
you paid for it. You paid Uncle Sam.
So all they have to do is sign up in the center, and Amy will have that information at the end.
Yes. That is all we do, is help people figure this stuff out.
Terrific.
This is our wheelhouse, and we work with every industry except those. There are a few industries we do not work with, which I will address separately. Yeah, so this is a free service. I've been doing this for almost 5 years now, which I cannot believe. I'm still not bored, because every business is different. So it is, every business is fun and different and unique. And so this is fun. But anyway, our business plan template is the one that I use with all of my clients. Sometimes I'll have people come to me with other templates that they've used. This is what I am accustomed to grading, is what I like to call it. So I use this template with all of my clients, because it's the one I've seen over and over and over, and I'm accustomed to working with. And usually if somebody's already drafted something, it's easy to plug and play. And I find that this version is really simple. It's not, I've seen others that are like, have a million bullets and not Times New Roman, but Roman numeral sections, and are really complicated. And this is not. It's pretty easy to break down. But it's got 5 points. You'll have products and services, the market, the industry, operations and management, and the budget. So it's really not that complicated. The first section is products and services. So you'll describe in detail your products and services and what you plan to sell. In the vitamin example, we would describe each one of those product types. So what does all natural mean? What does preservative free mean? What does organic mean, for example? And then maybe in an appendix, we would have an item listing. So we would list our vitamin C, vitamin B, multivitamin, et cetera. If you're a restaurant, you would have your cuisine type, your meal times, your menus section. So do you offer desserts, drinks, breakfast, lunch, et cetera? And then you might have your menu as an appendix. If you are a wedding venue, you talk about the wedding packages you might offer. You would describe the venue. If you're a restaurant, you would describe the restaurant, because part of what you offer is the environment. So you would include that as well. You'll include your where do you offer your services? We offered our vitamins in store and sold them online as well. So you're going to include that. If you're a restaurant, you sell in the restaurant and you probably sell to go. You might include that you sell to go items on the phone and online through online ordering or something like that, or through an app, for example. If you do it through an app, I mean, that's a differentiator. Some people love, millennials love apps, for example. So if you do it through an app or through DoorDash or something like that, you might include that. You're also going to include your pricing strategy and structure. So pricing strategy is really how you're defined in relation to your competitive landscape. So our vitamins were premium priced because they had the special attributes, and they were in comparison to the stuff sold at those premium specialty retailers like GNC, and they were more expensive than the other supplements and vitamins sold in this national drugstore chain. You can also be value priced or market competitive. So those are some pricing strategies. Then you also want to include your pricing structure. So we were priced by the bottle, but when you go to Whole Foods or Ozark Natural Foods and you get the almond butter that you pull the lever and it pours out your almond butter and you put it in the container, that's bulk pricing. So that's a pricing structure. So you want to include both in the business plan. That's important. And that all goes in the products and services section. So the next part is the market, and this is important. The supporting market research goes at the end, but I'll address it first because you're going to use market research to get to all of this. You're going to read through, like I said in the beginning, when we do the finance work at the upfront to figure out if your business idea is viable, we pull market research in the very beginning to look at consumers, to look at information about location, to look at industry data, and all of that is going to be used in your business plan. If you get to write a business plan, it will be used, and a lot of it will be used in this section. You're going to define your target market. A target market is not a Caucasian woman 30 to 40. I can use that statistic because I am a Caucasian woman 30 to 40. So I feel like it's not offensive if it's describing me. So, but a target market is much, much more descriptive. Our target market for the vitamin consumer was higher income women who are, I think, 25 to 40, who are heavily involved in the vitamin category. So they bought 2 or more vitamins. They were very active, exercising 4 or more times a week. We had a variety of other like behavioral, attitudinal descriptors for that target customer. But as you can see, I've got a rich description of this individual. And so that's what you want for your target market. You want to understand not only their demographics, like where they live, their race, their age, their gender, but what do they think about your product? What do they think about their activities? What do they do on the weekend? Where do they get your product? Where do they get their information? Because you're going to use that to develop products that they enjoy and want to use, and develop marketing programs that reach them. And so that's really important. We've got the market research we have enables us to look at consumer segments. So see people as whole pictures, the way I described our target market, and also look at people from a demographic standpoint. So get those statistics on age, gender, race, household income. So we can help you with our market research to really craft a picture of people accompanied by what you as a business owner and your knowledge of a specific industry feel like is your target customer. I mean, you're going to know, especially for people who have a trade and are starting a business. So like professional services or a trade, doctors probably know a lot about their customers, massage therapists know a lot about their customers, having worked in that particular trade. So we use all of that information to create a target market, but it's really important that that is well-defined and well-described. Just you need to know that, but it's also a section of your business plan. But it's important, if you never write a business plan, that you really truly understand that. You're also going to include a competitor analysis. This is not a list of your competitors. And I have to remind people when they write their business plan, because some people just don't want to write a business plan. I had one client, one of my favorite clients, who had an auto body shop, and he had spent 30 years as an auto body guy. He was finished his career working for an auto body shop as the general manager, and then opened his own. And so he needed a loan and had to write a business plan. I'm like, I can't do it for you. I can help you. And he told me, he was like, at one point I wanted to quit. And I just laugh. I'm like, well, you got to do it. A competitor analysis is not a list of competitors. When you open your business and you're running your business, you're not going to be thinking about your competition in terms of a list of people. You're going to have your eyes wide open to what they're doing the whole time you're operating your business. And so you need to think like that when you're writing the business plan. You're going to be thinking about their strengths and weaknesses, how they're marketing their business, what you know about their owner, how long they've been in business, their new products. And that needs to be demonstrated in your business plan, because when you're operating your business, you're going to be looking out like that at your competition, and that needs to come through in your business plan. Because I mean, you're not going to have your eyes closed to your competition, and that needs to come through in your business plan. You also need to have your brand and marketing strategy in this section of the business plan. So our brand strategy with those vitamins was we were creating a special line of vitamins that delivered those attractive product attributes in our national drugstore chain, so that our health and beauty customers could get those special vitamins without having to make a special trip elsewhere. That was the brand offering that we were giving to our customers in an effort to grow incremental sales for our store. We developed a whole awareness building marketing strategy, because nobody knew they were around because they were brand new, and an advertising campaign around what you put into your body matters, because we felt like those particular attributes were appealing to that customer because they felt like they were healthier. They were putting something healthier into their body because it featured those specific attributes. You'll also talk about your location decision. And again, this will include market research to support that decision. And we've got traffic count maps and other information in our market research that will help you make a location decision. I had a client that I worked with that they were opening kind of a high-end dog store, not to sell dogs, but sell dog accessories and dog products. They loved Fayetteville. They wanted to live in Fayetteville. And we ran all the market research, and it was just so evident that the products that they were going to be selling in the store was so much better fit for Benton County. And so they settled on a location in Rogers, and they took their first vacation last year. The business is thriving. They're doing well. It was the right decision. And they like Rogers. They're happier there. But that was the best decision. And we came to that conclusion based on the market research that we've pulled for them. So the next section is the industry. So you want to examine the industry, and in your business plan, look for information that supports that this is an industry that you want to get into. So back to kind of the venue industry, right now there's not a lot of good stats. In our case, in the vitamin industry, there were a lot of good industry factors to say that it was a good industry to be in. But you also want to address some of the issues facing the industry. If you want to get into specifics about some of the things you'll talk about sales and marketing in the industry. It's important to know this because different product categories are marketed in different ways because they all have different customers. Like you're going to market to a teenager or a parent of a teenager totally differently than you're going to market to me. I'm not a teenager or a parent of a teenager. In the vitamin industry or in that category, price promotion is a real big marketing vehicle. So that's one thing that we used. Email marketing was really effective for that particular national drugstore chain. Co-promotion was also something we did for that particular line. In-store advertising is also really effective in that particular category. And we also did a lot with or made efforts for expert endorsement. If a doctor says go do something, people usually listen. So that's really important for that category. You also want to look at finance and regulation. In that industry, it's not regulated by the FDA, but it is heavily scrutinized by the FDA. So the vitamin business does not put the kind of R&D money that pharmaceutical companies put behind their products. So you really have to adhere to third-party research that's been done and use claims that can be made based on that research. So your hands can be tied kind of behind your back in terms of claims you can make. And the company I worked for example, was pretty conservative. So there were a lot of things that we couldn't say, and we just had to rely on what people were hearing from their doctors or other experts, which presented a challenge. You also have to think about the business challenges. In that case, the industry is very volatile. Something will come out one year that says fish oil is great for heart health, and then the next year it may say that it's terrible for diabetics. I don't think that's come out, but it could. And then all of your demand for your product sinks, and you've got all these issues with your customers, and that just happens in that industry. I mean, let's think about all the industries right now that are suffering because of a pandemic. We haven't had a pandemic since 1918, and now we have a pandemic on our hands. And anything related to gatherings of people are suffering right now as a result. You also want to keep in mind industry opportunities. We really jumped on one. We found through research at the vitamin manufacturing company that people found those food trends attractive in vitamins. It's kind of like anything they were putting into their body, they wanted to also have these special attributes. And so we jumped on that and said, this is the way to go. This is how we're going to capture incremental sales. This is how we're going to differentiate a product in our stores. Let's do it. And so that's what we did. And you always want to look out for opportunities like that. And as you're addressing these issues, this is the section of the business plan that it will go into. What I like to say to people when you're writing your business plan, if you're going in for financing, in this section, you're looking for information about the industry that supports that it's a good industry to go into, but you're also transparent. If there are challenges or issues that the industry faces, you got to put it in here, and then you got to say how you're going to mitigate those issues or challenges. The next section is operations. I like to call this people and processes. So you're going to describe the key people that are working in the organization, their qualifications, their backgrounds, their roles or responsibilities, what they'll be doing, and then the day-to-day operations of the business. And this is important because you can't just open a business day one without a plan. I mean, I guess you could, but it's probably not the best idea. So I have people put this into their business plans, and I've never had anybody complain and say it was a bad idea or a waste of time. Usually people go through that process and discover something they need to buy, or something they need to do, or someone they need to hire, or something they need to do differently, or something they don't need to do, or something they want to not do. Or through that process, it really enables them to see some different things that they need to either do or not do, or et cetera. And so that's a really important step. And I think it shows anyone that you're trying to get money from that you've really thought through how you're going to operate your business. So finally is the budget and financial plan. If you've worked with us, you're probably almost finished with this, because through the feasibility section, you've built out a budget. Your final budget will be a little bit different from what you started out, because you will have fleshed out a location. You will have settled on a piece of real estate. So that changes usually if you're brick and mortar. You're going to run your financials. Like I've had a lot of clients where we run financial scenarios for 2 or 3 different brick and mortar locations. We'll have fleshed out a marketing plan that maybe started one way and we end up with something different. That gets fleshed out. So you'll have a final budget that goes into the business plan, and it will have your final funding proposal. You may start with a business idea and you have to call, a few different, sources of capital to figure out how much money you can have to put a down payment on a loan, or if you've got other investors that might want to invest, a few conversations may have to be had to determine what capital you can bring to the table. And so that will be the final component of your business plan. And then the next section is the executive summary. So this slide has all the pieces that will make up an executive summary. What I want you to take away from this summary is that an executive summary is a summary of the business plan. So it is not a bulleted list of items that you see on this slide necessarily. It will include all of these, but you need to write it like it is a summary of the business plan. So someone can read in 1 to 2 pages what is inside the business plan, and be able to say, yes, this is something I want to read a little bit more about, or no, this is not a business that I'm interested in pursuing financing for or getting involved with, or whatever. It needs to be complete, concise, hit the high points for each of the sections of the business plan itself. Some of the other things that you need to think about, we'll go over now. You will have addressed insurance through the business planning process and the financial component of the business assessment, but we'll go through this process anyway. I worked with a marketing consultant in New York who, this was after I worked with her, but she did this on another business. She made a mistake that cost a large company a considerable amount of money. And she somehow thought to have, I guess, the equivalent of marketing consultant malpractice insurance. I don't know what the policy was actually called, but she was this really smart lady and had some kind of insurance policy that protected her. And she was able to pay the company the cost of the actual loss of this project and keep her reputation, keep her contract role on this business. And it's just an example of how you need to go in, meet with a small business insurance agent, not your homeowner's insurance agent, not your car insurance agent, but a small business insurance agent, and have some really candid conversations and thorough talks about what kind of business you're going to be doing, what products you're going to be selling. You might bring your business plan and work with them to help you understand what kind of coverages you need. Because I would have never thought a marketing consultant needed coverage for something like that. She probably didn't think she needed coverage for something like that, but she talked to an insurance agent, got it, and she was really glad she had it. Some of the standard types of insurance that you'll find is like property and casualty, which protects assets, general liability, which is general coverage, product liability in case one of your products harms someone, workers' compensation. This protects you in the event that one of your employees is injured on the job. Business interruption, if for instance your business is interrupted for some reason, you can recoup recoup expenses or lost sales. And then life insurance on key personnel. You also need to be well aware of employment laws in the state of Arkansas. I said this in the beginning when we talked about management capacity or capabilities or willingness. You are also the HR director. So you need to be really familiar with employment laws. You do not want to have a human resources lawsuit on your hands or a human resources issue on your hands. So you need to be well informed about employment laws or have access to a human resources attorney or employment attorney, I should say. You need to know the proper practices for hiring and firing. You need to understand the differences between contract workers and employees. Employees you pay taxes on, they're easier or they're more difficult to fire. Contract laborers are sometimes for a point in time only. They're easier to release from work. You don't pay them benefits. You need to consider, if you've got a lot of employees, hourly workers, consider an employee handbook. The Rogers-Lowell Chamber of Commerce has one on their website that you can download. And you can do that and then have an attorney proofread it or look over it to make sure you've got all your I's dotted and T's crossed. I think I got that right. That's a really great idea. Once you've got policies in place and people have like parameters and guidelines for how to behave. So that's something you might want to consider. Also consider temp agencies and employment agencies to help you. They've got a lot of knowledge and that's their job, is to have that knowledge. So that's something that you might also consider. If you're thinking about doing business out of your house, number one, make sure you can. The last thing you want is just you're hustling, you're selling your widget like hotcakes out of your house, and then your neighbor discovers this and knows it's against the rules and calls the city and you get shut down, and then you are very quickly trying to find an office or a location to do business. So it is very important that you make sure that you can do business out of your house. So I believe it's a planning commission question. You also need to check covenants to make sure you can do business through a POA, like that you don't have a property owners association covenant preventing you from doing it. So just make sure it's okay to do business out of your home. If you can, there are tax advantages to doing business out of your house. You can write off some of your mortgage or utilities on your taxes. You need to find out what insurance coverage you need to have if you're doing business out of your home. That goes back to the whole conversation about insurance. Just go. We had an insurance agent on a call that we had, a team call that we had this week, and he said something that really stuck with me. He was like, you don't need to be as concerned about what questions you ask your insurance agent. You need to be more concerned about what questions the insurance agent asks you. So I'm going to share that piece of information with you because I hadn't heard that before. But make sure they're asking you all the right questions. You also need to consider what feel like small things, but are really big things, like mail delivery and telephone. I personally would not want my customers knowing my home address or having my personal phone number. That's me personally. Maybe other people feel differently, but it's something that you need to think about. Like, what are the true consequences of that? If you have an angry customer, do you want them to know where you live? So that's something that you need to think about if you have a home-based business. Marketing your business. This has its own section because I've worked with a lot of small business clients when we're doing that budget. We're thinking about financing and we're trying to make sure that, okay, we've only got so much cash for a down payment on a loan. We're trying to squeeze cuts and like, okay, this piece of land costs this much money. It does. This building costs this much money. This fee costs this much money. What can we squeeze? And people want to squeeze their marketing budget. If you sit down and come up with a solid strategy for your brand and for your marketing and come up with a well thought out marketing plan with good tactics for your customer, for your target customer, you will see a positive ROI, but you have to invest in your business. It's just a matter of thinking through your marketing plan, but you absolutely have to invest in your business. You cannot just sit back, open a business and expect people to come find you. It's just not going to happen. Some basic things. If we were all in a room and I could see everybody, I would do this. Give me a show of hands for who goes to Google when they're looking for something. And everybody would raise their hand and say yes. So then I would lean in and say, this is why you have to have a website. Anytime anybody goes to Google and a business shows up and it's just a Facebook page and it's not a website, I don't know what percent. I've not done research. I could probably Google and find it. But most people will go to the next item because that business doesn't have a website. And they're like, well, it doesn't have a website. So it's just probably not as good or not as legitimate. You have to have a website. You also have to have social media. I guess a lot of people think, well, I can have one or without the other. They go hand in hand. And you need to make sure that you have the proper social media platforms. If you're marketing to my 68-year-old dad who plays golf, goes to the lake, plays bridge, he is not on TikTok. And he doesn't have kids on TikTok. His kids are grown. And his grandchild is too young to be on TikTok. TikTok is not even in his world. Facebook is all about his life. He's on Facebook nonstop. So you want to pick the proper channels for your target audience, but it's important to be on social media because it drives traffic to your website. It improves search engine optimization, but you have to have both. Also, if you're in a service industry, if you're a CPA, if you're an attorney, especially if you're starting out, or another person, I mean, I think it's great to do networking no matter what. It helps you if you own any business, because if people know you and they like you, they're more likely to do business with you. That is a fact. But especially if you're in a service business where people are going to be buying a service from you, good old-fashioned put your foot on the pavement and go to some networking events and shake people's hands is not like an over thing. Still go out and do it. I still do it and still get clients. And right now we're in a pandemic, so it's more virtual, but we're not going to be in this setting forever. And there are still virtual options, but get out there and do it. I still go to certain networking events, and we always talk about, I get a few clients out of it, just doing it. I do it because I like to get out of the office. A little bit of my extrovert side needs to go do it, but it is still worth it to do a little bit of in-person networking. It's called nwanetworking.com. It's got a list of the networking events in Northwest Arkansas. If you're a morning person, go to a coffee connection. If you like happy hour, go to some of the happy hours. If you're an introvert, bring a friend. Figure out what you can balance, do what you can, but there's still something to be said for a little bit of networking if you're in a service-based industry.
Really quick, Lori, and without going too far down the social media rabbit hole, because I know that we definitely could, a quick question about what LinkedIn is useful for. You've got C2B and B2B and all of those different kind of variables when it comes to the different channels. Can you give us a little bit of, LinkedIn is becoming more and more common, especially through the pandemic, for a networking kind of tool in that virtual realm. Do you have any recommendations when it comes to the use of LinkedIn?
So every business needs to have a LinkedIn page. Even if you are marketing to kids, you need to have a LinkedIn page. You just have to have a LinkedIn page. You are a business. It's a business format. So you need, or a business social media. So even if you don't do a lot of marketing on LinkedIn, you still need to have a LinkedIn presence. And then it's a great tool for networking for other individuals. We do a lot on LinkedIn because we're B2B. We have stakeholders. We want to have relationships like with Cal at Wright Lindsey Jennings, like with Eileen at Arvest with our contract workers and other social media marketing companies, etc. We want to reach stakeholders. We want to reach small business owners. We want to meet businesses that serve small businesses through LinkedIn. So it's critical, I would say, especially if you're in the service industry of serving small businesses or large businesses or looking for jobs, it's critical to be on LinkedIn. But every business needs a LinkedIn page. Now, what you do with your content depends on the business, and how active you are on LinkedIn depends on your customer. I think everything, all of this, the big takeaway, all of this depends on your customer. You can't, there's no one size fits all answer to any of the marketing questions because it's all rooted in your customer. So now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Cal.
Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
Thanks, Lori. And of course, right whenever it was my time to go, my dogs start barking at the mailman. So that is
Virtual world.
perfect. Let's see if I can get this PowerPoint up. All right. Amy, are you seeing it?
Yeah, looks great. Yeah. Move into presentation format and you're good to go.
All right.
Like a super attorney.
Look at that. Appreciate everybody. As Lori mentioned, my name's Cal Rose. I'm a business and tax attorney at Wright Lindsey Jennings. We're an Arkansas-based law firm. We have offices in Rogers, which is where I'm usually headquartered out of, and then Little Rock as well. My practice, while we have litigators and people at our firm that handle all aspects of the law, my particular specialty is working with startup businesses, medium life cycle businesses, all the way through from the very beginning stages to selling companies, helping them with day-to-day contracts, employment issues, and things like that. So I always tell people if we're in court, somebody's in trouble, it's probably me. If you're relying on me to help you in court, you might be in trouble too. Everything I do is consulting, advisory based with small businesses. I always like to start off my slides with this quote. It is even especially applicable to my life. We had our first child last week, so if you hear babies crying in the background, I apologize for that. Everybody has the next biggest, greatest idea about what their company is going to be, and when you start putting pen to paper and going through the processes that Lori discussed, putting your business plan in paper, it's a lot harder than just kind of dreaming up the business. And so it's having the fortitude to follow through with all these processes really helpful to having a successful business in the long run. Just to give you guys a brief kind of idea of the issues I'm going to be discussing today. And some of these we're going to kind of speed through, especially after seeing the responses to the questions on the front end. Very few of you indicated that you're probably going to need an actual lease agreement. And most of you being in the arts and entertainment space means that you probably don't need leases and for real estate, but you may need exhibit rental agreements and things like that. So I'll try to tailor some of this to more of the business issues that I think that are applicable to the people that are with us today. But we'll spend a little bit of time just talking about entity structure, what your options are, LLCs, corporations, things like that. We'll move into regulatory issues, tax issues, what nobody enjoys talking about. And then finally, just briefly hit on some employment issues and contracts while saving enough time for Eileen to talk financing and loan resources with you at the end of our presentation today. What issues are we going to be talking about? Why should you care? Most people come to an attorney or form a legal entity for liability protection and asset protection. Whenever we'll get into this in a little bit, but if you have a business that is not incorporated or that's not being run under an LLC or a corporation or some other official vehicle, your personal assets are at risk from your creditors or anyone who sues you. That's what we talk about with limiting your liability, ease of administration, having your personal affairs clearly delineated from your business affairs and your business expenses, and having all of that in the name of an LLC or a corporation or some other entity really helps from not only from the IRS perspective, but when you go to a bank and you want to talk to them about getting financing and a host of other issues, tax benefits, avoiding litigation. Most of you want to do that. Transferring ownership, what happens, especially if you have founders or business partners that you're starting this business with. What happens if they pass away? What happens if they no longer want to be involved in the business? What happens if the two of you grow to hate each other? How do you unwind the business? Those are things that are much easier and better addressed on the front end, while everybody's on good terms, than waiting till it's too late and you're going at each other's throats. So we'll talk about those issues a little bit. Managing cash flows really helps for the bank piece and financing piece. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about protecting intellectual property. If anyone has a business that is either software based, and even a lot of arts and entertainment based businesses, especially in traditional media, books, publishing, music. If you're creating art, no matter what the medium or format is, you need to be cognizant of the risk of other people being able to use that, and you not having the ability to protect it from infringement. So we'll start off, as discussed, just talking about the four basic structure types of a business. The first one is sole proprietorship. It's not really a business structure. It's more of the lack of business structure more than anything else. It is the default of what happens if you have a business venture that you're doing on your own with no other partners, and you haven't formed a company. A partnership is a similar concept, except it's two or more people that are entering into a business relationship without forming a company, either a corporation or an LLC. There are a lot of different types of entities that can be formed. There are, if you Google it, there are Wyoming trusts, there are Delaware trusts, there are Nevada trusts, there are limited partnerships, there are LLP. There's all different kinds of things. For the most part, that's not what small businesses use. Those really aren't the best vehicles for most people. And so really what we're going to spend most of my time today focusing on are corporations and LLCs, which are much more common and beneficial for people starting a new business. As I talked about, sole proprietorship, the main reason why I hit on this issue so much in these presentations is that this is the default of legally what you are considered to be if you haven't formed an LLC. So we got little Jimmy here. He's got an LLC or a lemonade stand. He doesn't have an LLC. And let's say that lemonade has something wrong in it, makes a lot of people sick. They have to go to the hospital, and they go back to Jimmy and they want him to pay their hospital bills. Well, because he's a sole proprietorship and doesn't have limited liability, those creditors can then start seizing assets. If they sue him and obtain a judgment against him, they can start seizing his personal assets. In addition to, his lemons and his nice chalkboard that he handcrafted right there. They can go after his baseball card set. They can go after his Legos. They're going after all of his stuff. And so that's why it's important to keep this in mind, and why forming an LLC or a corporation is a huge step and provides a lot of benefits from your family's perspective, is because without it, here your sole proprietorship, you have no liability protection. You still have to obtain some permits and licenses, but it's really, think of sole proprietorship more as the lack of any sort of formal business structure, and you have no liability protection there. General partnership is the same concept, same issues. It's just now it's not Jimmy, it's Jimmy and his friends. What makes a partnership even more dangerous is that each one of those four partners are personally liable for the actions of any of the other partners. So if Jimmy's business partner gets in a wreck or poisons the lemonade or does something even without Jimmy's knowledge or awareness, he can still be personally held responsible to the creditors of his partners, as long as the action or debt or liability that we're talking about is related to the activities of the business. And so you're all in it together for good or for worse in our general partnership, which really brings us to why probably most of you, why most people come to an attorney is they want to avoid being classified as a sole proprietorship or as a partnership. And so the two traditional kind of entities that most small businesses use to create their legal structure are corporations and LLCs. We'll talk about C corporations, which is what this slide discusses. We'll also talk about S corporations, if you've heard of that. An S corporation is a tax designation. It's not a legal one. And so, most of what we'll talk about here that applies to a C corporation is also applicable to an S corp. But for tax purposes, there are a lot of differences. So with a corporation, the corporation is its own entity. According to the Supreme Court, corporations are people. They are separate taxpayers. And so the corporation has liability for its actions, but the owners of the corporation do not. That's a huge distinction, and historically the main benefit of the corporate entity. The documents that you would use to form a corporation, the two main ones are articles of incorporation and your bylaws. The articles of incorporation are what you would file with the Secretary of State's office, while the bylaws are an internal governing document that discusses shareholder meetings, board of directors meetings, things of that nature. Corporations by statute have kind of three different, the way I always remember it or think of it, it's kind of like our government. There's kind of three branches of government and they all have checks and balances on one another. Corporations have a similar structure internally in the sense that you have shareholders, you have directors, you have officers. The shareholders' main role and function is to elect the directors. The directors, historically, traditionally are, big picture. They make decisions, on very high level issues, but they're not really day-to-day officers. The board elects officers, a president, a CEO, a treasurer, those sort of things to run the day-to-day operations. And so each one of them has their own kind of function. They all work together to run the company. Big thing with corporations, though, is you do need to keep the corporation separate, from your personal affairs. You need to have record keeping. You pay a franchise tax to the Secretary of State every year. But that's the cost of that liability protection is the franchise taxes that the Secretary of State requires every year. It's usually $150. There are some deviations from that. We talked about here double taxation. That's really the key difference between a C Corp and an S Corp. Corporations pay taxes on their profits. Currently, that tax rate is 21%. And then if that money, if you as the owner want to take that money out of the corporation, it's a dividend, and that dividend gets taxed again, either at 0, 15, or 20%. So when you hear double taxation, or if anyone ever tells you that, oh, you shouldn't ever be a C corporation because they're taxed twice, that's what people are referring to, is that the corporation pays a 21% tax, but that money left over is still sitting in the corporation. You as the owner can't just take it out without declaring a dividend or a distribution, which is then hit with an additional, most people would pay 15% tax on that, which gets you to about 35, 36%. That's different from an S Corp. S Corps, all the stuff we just talked about with officers, directors, shareholders, the way those, the structure, the way those, kind of work and handle day-to-day operations is the same for an S Corp. The only difference with an S Corp is that it does not have that double taxation issue that we just talked about. So with an S Corp, it's what is considered under the tax law as a pass-through or a flow-through entity, which essentially just means that the net income, the profits, and the income taxes that are created by the S Corp's operation flow through or pass through to the owner's individual tax return. So if I own an S Corp and the S Corp makes $200,000 in profit, that S Corp does not pay those taxes. Instead, let's say I own 100%. Instead, I have to, on my personal income tax return through what's called a K-1, I have to report $200,000 of income that I have to pay taxes on personally, not the corporation, but me personally, I pay taxes on it. And that is true even if I didn't actually take all $200,000 out of that business. That $200,000 could be sitting in the company's bank account, and I never declared a dividend or a distribution. The way the IRS taxes S Corps, it's kind of they say, hey, look, the benefit is that you only get taxed once, but the downside is you're going to get taxed once on your profits, even if you reinvest those into the business, even if you don't take them out personally. Now, the good part of that is once you pay taxes on that money once, you don't pay taxes on it again. So if I pay $200,000 of taxes this year, and next year, or even 3 years from now, I finally wanted to give myself a distribution, I could get that money out of the company without paying any additional taxes on it because it's already been taxed. That's the benefit of an S Corp. It's that one layer of tax, and it's taxed at your individual income tax rate. So it depends on how much money you make and, conjunction with your other business activities. But so for some people that may be 18%, for some it may be 26%, all the way up to 36 at the federal level. That's the big benefit of an S Corp. Most CPAs and accountants that you talk to will tell you to be an S Corp, because S Corps can avoid payroll taxes. There's some, I wouldn't necessarily call them a loophole, because the IRS knows about it and has blessed it, but it's just it's a discrepancy in the tax code that allows S Corps to avoid paying payroll taxes on a portion of your earnings. But there are limitations to S Corps that CPAs and accountants don't always tell you. And I've seen a lot of businesses get tripped up by this. Just know that if you are an S Corp, that means the restrictions are: one, all owners of the S Corp have to be U.S. individuals. So you can't have foreign ownership in an S Corp. It also means you can't have another entity be an owner in your S Corp. Has to be people, has to be U.S. citizens, people. So you can't have a private equity company invest in your company if you're an S Corp, because they're going to invest through some sort of entity. We'll compare that with LLCs, limited liability companies, which are today probably the most prevalent and common type of entity that is used. Just a little bit of background: LLCs in Arkansas did not exist until 1993. I guess at this point, 1993 is 27 years ago, so it's not that recent, but in the eyes of the law, that is a pretty recent development. Our tax code, the IRS federal tax code that we are working on right now, was created in 1986. So the tax code was created before LLCs even existed. Because of that, LLC is purely a legal designation. It is not a tax one. It ends up being to your benefit for reasons we'll talk about in a little bit. But essentially, if you're an LLC, you can choose for tax purposes to be an S Corp. So you can be an LLC for legal purposes, but you can be a partnership, you can be a C Corp, or you can be an S Corp. In terms of how you pay taxes, there's a form. It's called a check the box form, because literally it has the options on there, and it says just check the box and tell us how you prefer to be taxed. There's a lot of flexibility there, but once you check that box and make your election to be treated as an S Corp, you're stuck with it for 5 years. And so while it can be changed, it can't be changed right away. So if your CPA or accountant, makes a recommendation that you should maybe be an S Corp or be taxed in some different manner, hopefully they also tell you that, that it's somewhat permanent. 5 years is how long you can go before you change it again. LLCs limit your personal liability. So it provides that big benefit. And it also has the pass-through, tax nature that we talked about with S corps. It's the only kind of company that provides, those two benefits without the burdensome kind of statutory requirements that a corporation does. LLCs are generally just easier to set up. They're easier to run. Corporations by law have to have board of directors meetings, shareholders meetings. You have to elect boards of directors. There are a lot of requirements for corporations under our statutes. LLCs, there's hardly any. So you don't have to have annual meetings. You should. I would recommend you, if you have business partners, to have meetings with those partners and discuss the business, but it's not a legal requirement. Again, it's the most new type of entity we have, also probably the most common from what we see.
Hey, Cal, like you said, this is one of the most common, and it's obviously, in your dream world, a lot of these companies have not formed their legal entity yet. So we did have a couple of questions. One is about, and one was specifically to artists, that a lot of artists are set up as sole proprietorships, and what you feel like, the advantages of being an LLC could be in that kind of, from a liability standpoint. Very specifically, Adrian was asking that sole proprietors are exposed, for people visiting the studio and all of those other things that can happen, just personal injury, which also goes back to insurance that Lori covered a little bit too. But what are some of the things that you're seeing when it comes to those differences and those traditionally sole proprietors, and what some of the advantages or not would be in LLC?
Yeah, I would say, one, hopefully you have insurance. Even if you're a sole proprietor, if you're doing any sort of business activity, you should have business insurance. Lori talked about that. And so your insurance policy is always going to be kind of your first line of defense. When we talk about personal liability, usually, your insurance policy is going to cover that first. Now, if the claim exceeds the policy's limits, that's when your personal liability really comes into play. That's why usually it's personal injury. It's medical issues really that create bills like that are really problematic. Travel. If any part of your business requires employees or anybody working for you, to get in a car and drive on a road to take anything anywhere, and that person gets in a wreck while they are performing a business function, they can sue your business. So that's probably where we see things go wrong the most. But I'd also say, in addition to liability, that conversation, from a tax perspective, if the IRS likes to audit what are called hobby loss businesses, there's a distinction that the IRS takes between, is this a business or is this just a hobby that you're not, if it's considered a hobby under the IRS tax regs, you're not allowed to deduct the expenses. And so you obviously want to make sure that you are able to deduct the expenses with your business, but there are requirements. You have to make a profit in 3 out of 5 years. And there's a lot of other blending. If the IRS thinks that you are blending personal hobby expenses in with business ones, it's an automatic red flag, and it's going to trigger an audit. By putting a legal entity in place and by running all of those very legitimate business expenses through your LLC or through your corporation, it provides that separation that makes it much harder for the IRS to come in and try to say, well, there's no distinction between, your personal kind of things you're doing on the side for fun and what you're doing for business purposes. So I think even for that, avoiding an audit, and if you were to get audited, having that line of separation is really beneficial.
Absolutely. Well, and another question that's kind of confusing, I know, is this, you can be an LLC and a tax designation as an S Corp. And one of the questions that was asked was, can you change your designation overall? So if, can you change your designation if you started as an LLC, can you change your entire legal designation to an S Corp or a C Corp? So explain the difference between the tax designation of that and your actual legal entity.
Yeah, and so the short answer is yes, you can. There is a process from converting an LLC into a corporation or corporation into an LLC, and vice versa. It just, it essentially requires you to just file additional paperwork and pay some fees with the Secretary of State. That's going to change your legal entity. It may also change your tax designation. So if you start out as an LLC and you never make that check the box form election that we talked about, the default, if you have one owner, is you're going to be taxed as a sole proprietorship. Don't get that confused with being a sole proprietorship for legal purposes. This is for tax purposes only. If you then converted that LLC into a corporation, you would no longer be a sole proprietorship, because by IRS law, corporations are not eligible to be sole proprietorships. It would turn you into a corporation. So there is a process of changing your legal structure. A consequence of that may be that your tax structure also changes. Comparing that with an LLC, where you can change your tax structure without ever doing anything to your legal structure, wouldn't require you a lot of times get a new EIN. You don't have to change names on contracts or anything like that. So I guess that's how I would distinguish between the two.
Fantastic. And then we do have a question, Karen. I think that we haven't quite been diving into this limited liability slide just yet. So we'll let Cal go into that, and hopefully he'll be able to answer your question. So awesome, Cal. Thank you.
You're welcome. So limited liability, we talked about it. I don't think that just because I always give the example of, like, you can't run your ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend over in your company truck and avoid liability for that. Just because you have LLC on the side of your car or, on a contract, doesn't mean that you're not still personally liable for your fraud, for your criminal activity, or a lot of times gross negligence and intentional misconduct. So there still are some times when you can be held personally liable. We're just talking about ordinary business types of negligence or breach of contracts issues and things like that. There's also a concept called piercing the corporate veil. It sounds really cool, but it is not. And essentially what that is courts will sometimes look at a business and say, for any number of reasons, and there's a lot of them, there's whether or not, a lot of times it's because someone has set up an LLC or a corporation and, they're paying their personal bills out of the corporation's bank account, or, if they're using the LLC really as just a device to, defraud creditors, or if it's just kind of a sham, or if they're not following corporate policies or the statutes, a court does have the ability to say, we're taking that limited liability away from you. And so it's important that you have a separate bank account, that you pay business, expenses out of your business bank account, and you pay personal expenses out of your personal bank account. That's probably the biggest factor that courts look at whenever there's a piercing of the veil argument. I don't know if that answers the question or not. My chat function is not up.
That's all right. Feel free to ask again if it still isn't clear. Okay.
I'm going to speed through a couple of these so that we give Eileen enough time to go through her slides. Things to consider from the legal side, in addition to what type of entity you're going to form. Name availability is a big one. Just because the Secretary of State will let you form a company with a certain name does not mean that you can necessarily use that name however you want, out in the stream of commerce. If someone has trademarked that name, they've registered it with the U.S. Copyright and Trademark Office. They may not have registered it with the Secretary of State's office because it's not required, and that may not be the company's name. So like right now, I could probably form an LLC called McDonald's Restaurant LLC. The Secretary of State would probably let me form that company. But if I opened a McDonald's restaurant LLC, I would get a cease and desist letter from their attorneys very quickly. And so make sure no one else is using that name in your area, especially, and in your industry. Those are the big ones. There are, we have IP attorneys and who can help with that. But before you start spending money on business cards and websites and advertising and marketing, make sure that your name's available. Speak with a CPA and accountant if you can. As soon as you start making a good amount of profit, I would definitely recommend you to find a good CPA and develop that relationship as early as possible. I think a good CPA saves you more money and time than what their fees are. It's not always the case, but a lot do. And I think that's an important relationship to start from the beginning. If you're a single owner, if it's only going to be you as the owner of the business, a lot of these questions probably aren't applicable. But for anybody who's going into a new business venture with other owners, I think, I can't stress enough how important it is to consider these and hopefully incorporating the answers to these questions into your governing documents on the front end. Entering into a business partnership is like getting married. It ends in two ways: death and divorce. And if you can plan for the divorce in a way that doesn't, cause you to shut down the business or, really interfere with the business's operations, obviously that is better. I will say the law has a default way of resolving disputes between 50-50 partners, and that's to shut down the business, dissolve it, and to split up its assets. And which is not the best thing to do whenever you have contracts and existing business relationships and things like that. And so again, if you can plan for some of these things on the front end, works out a lot better. Any business attorney should be able to walk you through alternatives, ways to address these. There's a lot of different ways to handle disputes in a 50-50 ownership situation. You just have to kind of figure out the one that makes sense for your business.
Cal, is a 50-50 very commonly recommended, since there are a lot of pitfalls in that?
It's my least favorite. I mean, from a legal side, it results in more problems because there is no good way of resolving disputes. The problem is, most people want to go into a business if there's two partners. 50-50 is the easy way to split it. But once it's 50-50, unless you have built in a dispute resolution procedure into your governing documents, they're literally, the law has no good way of resolving that situation. The only thing you can do is you can go to a court, tell a court that me and my business partner can't agree on, what to do with the management of this company, and we're at a standstill and we're at a deadlock, and the corporation can dissolve it. So it's just, no is the short answer. I don't recommend 50-50, but if that is the economic reality of the ownership situation, as long as you have a way of resolving those disputes, then, I form a lot of businesses that are 50-50. We just talk through these issues on the front end. As long as my clients are comfortable doing it that way, then that's what we go with. But you need to have that figured out on the front end.
And how often, Cal, do you think that there is, there's multiple partners, so then you've got the other ratio of 3 people, sometimes more, sometimes 3 makes a little bit more, at least there's a tiebreaker in that right. Scenario.
Yeah, I mean, it's any number. I mean, you can even have, it doesn't have to be a third. I mean, having a third person in there, even if they only own, a couple percentage points, can still provide that tiebreaker that you need. In situations like that, I still encourage people to think about, are there certain decisions that you would want unanimous approval for and not just a simple majority? Selling the business, bringing in new owners, selling shares of stock in the company. A lot of times we will put provisions in place that say that every day, just day-to-day type of decisions that can be handled with a simple majority. But if we're going to change like the fundamental ownership structure or any of these kind of, 5 or 6 really high level things, we think that should be unanimous and not just a simple majority. So there's a lot of flexibility. You have to build that into your documents on the front end, because just by default, it's going to be simple majority under the corporate and LLC statutes.
Awesome. Thank you.
This information, more or less, I wanted to put it in here. Lori hit on a lot of this. I really just wanted to put it in here for your slides. It's not something that we need to go over in a huge amount of detail, but the ASBTDC does offer a lot of really helpful resources on licensing and compliance and tax requirements, and I'd encourage you to take full advantage of those. Taxes as well. The government is going to end up getting their piece, but that's why you can have services like this today that are free, and you can go to Lori and get those consulting services. But just know that again, there are a lot of taxes. Franchise taxes are a big one. $150 to the Secretary of State that you need to pay. That it's not a big dollar amount, but if you do not pay the franchise tax every year, they will revoke your business license and you will default to a sole proprietorship because your LLC or corporation, you will find out, is no longer active because the state took it away from you. There's some more tax resources there. Employee handbooks are big if you have employees, especially, and if you're in any sort of, construction, trucking. If you're in an industry where medical marijuana issues pop up, your employee handbook becomes really critical. You can't really rely on a drug test anymore. If you do drug test your employees, if your employees are medical marijuana patients, you have to go. It's way more complicated, and we could probably spend an hour just talking about that. But just know that if you're in a regulated industry, you need to have medical marijuana policies in your handbook. The independent contractor versus employee designation is a huge tax audit issue. If with employees, if you have an employee that you're paying a salary to, you also have withholding, you have Social Security taxes and payroll taxes that you have to pay on behalf of the employee. Independent contractors, you don't. And so for a long time, people were just saying, hey, we're going to pay everybody as independent contractors instead of employees, because then we don't have to pay them health insurance. We don't have to pay benefits. We don't have to pay, we don't have to withhold any taxes. We don't have to pay payroll taxes. Then what would happen is the independent contractor thought they were an employee. They weren't, they were spending all of that money. And so when they found out that they owed the IRS $25,000, they didn't have it. And the IRS didn't get their money. So now the IRS is going after companies for mislabeling employees as independent contractors. There's a lot of helpful information online that you can look at to kind of help you navigate through that consideration. And obviously, if you have an attorney, talk to your attorney about that as well. Again, just going to kind of breeze through these. Most of you said you weren't going to have, leases anyway. Provided some information there. One thing that I always just encourage people to understand and realize about a lease: if you sign a 5-year lease and if after year 1 you want to leave, or your business shuts down, or you decide you don't need a lease anymore, you're still on the hook for that lease for 5 years. Even if they lease it out to another tenant, they can still collect rent from you for the entirety of that term. And so leases are the most financially, one of the most financially important documents in terms of the obligations that you're taking on. And I can't tell you how many clients come to me after they've signed a lease and said, hey, we signed this, we never really read it. We just kind of signed what the, realtor gave to us. And can you tell us what it says? It's like, well, at this point I can tell you what it says, but I can't do anything about it because you've already signed it. Commercial contracts, I'll kind of just end on a little bit about intellectual property, especially because I know there's a lot of arts and entertainment, businesses or entrepreneurs in the audience today. If you have anyone, if you're creating intellectual property, and that can be software, but it can also be, it can be any sort of medium, whether it's a book, a painting, sculpture, any of that. If you have other people, whether they're employees or independent contractors or friends or whoever it is, if they do a significant amount of work on that project, they have ownership rights in that project just as much as you do. And just because, they're an employee, or just because they're an independent contractor, or, whatever the situation is, just because you have a contract with them and you paid them for their services doesn't mean that they in turn handed over their intellectual property rights in, that creation. And so it's really important for anyone who's creating intellectual property, if you have employees or independent contractors, especially, who are helping you create that intellectual property, that you get a contract from them that contains an appropriate provision. It's usually called an IP assignment clause, where they say, hey, you're paying me this money, I'm doing this for you, and I agree as the contractor that I don't have any ownership rights in this creation, and I transfer all of my ownership to you. So those are really important. I've seen those go bad, 5-10 years down the road, because our client hasn't been able to prove that they owned that intellectual property outright, and that somebody who worked on it 10 years prior didn't have a claim against them. So that's another big one, especially for this audience, to be mindful of. Again, shareholder buy-sell agreements, that's really only applicable if you have multiple owners, and it goes through it addresses those issues that we talked about earlier about, what happens if an owner doesn't want to be part of the business anymore, what happens if they die, and their ownership is going to get passed on to their spouse or their kids who you hate and who you don't want to be in business with. Having those agreements in place and having that process kind of lined out at the front end is really helpful in not interrupting your business. All right.
We've got a few questions. We have a few questions for you, Cal. Even though we're not covering nonprofit today, that is another structure and entity. Are there some resources that you can send anyone to that you would recommend, either that they can kind of get their feet wet in that?
Yeah, I mean, a nonprofit is just a whole other animal. There's actually a nonprofit clinic at the law school. The law school offers a nonprofit clinic, and it's, there are attorneys who run it, but then they allow second and third year law students to do a lot of the legwork. In terms of cost perspective, you're not going to beat that. They can perform those services at a fraction of what a law firm can. We have nonprofit attorneys. I do a little bit of nonprofit work myself, but nonprofit is it's such a different animal. It would take another hour for us to really go through all of that. And it's just, I don't think we have time.
But a whole other seminar, whole other workshop on that we could probably do. We also, and this may be for you, Lori, is about if they have a food truck. Catherine, I know you're working with food trucks as well. About a state business license, do you also have to have a city business license? So I think that's a case-by-case basis, if I'm not mistaken, but do you have any input on that?
Yeah, so I believe the LLC from the state, that's what I would, well, Cal should really make that recommendation, but I would suggest a legal entity. So you can talk to your attorney on what kind of legal entity you should have for a food truck, because I have an MBA, not a law degree by choice. I think that should cover you. And then you may need a permit to operate a food truck. So that's going to be a city thing.
Mm-hmm. Cal or Catherine, any other comments on that? Okay.
Yeah. That's going to be mainly city licenses, city regulations. The state isn't going to regulate that unless you have to get I'm not aware of food trucks that serve alcohol, but you would have to go through the state for any sort of alcohol permits.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful. And we do have a specific, and I know, Cal, this is very general advice that you're giving, and somebody would probably have to either meet with their CPA or personal attorney, but we do have a question about if a spouse who works, can they put the business in her name to avoid self-employment taxes? And of course, if you want to pipe in and clarify on that, we're more than happy to take that. But I think is that one of those case-by-case basis that maybe they should speak to someone specifically?
I can answer. I mean, that's one. I think all that would do is it would trigger self-employment taxes for your spouse, unless you're saying your spouse isn't going to work in the business at all. then you're getting in the realm of blurring the lines on what you're telling the IRS is going on and what's actually going on. And so I would definitely say if you're going to do something like that, talk to an attorney or a CPA before you move forward with it. It could end up backfiring and get you into more trouble than the potential savings.
Fantastic. I know that we want to save time for Eileen. So again, continue to pop your questions into chat. Also, feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Your little box will pop to the top and we'll see that you have a question for us. Eileen, we've been waiting patiently for you. You have all the answers to all the things that we're waiting for. Finances, big topic.
Well, I wish that I could see more smiling faces, because I feel like the goal of my presentation today is to somehow squash the preconceived notion that all bankers are mean people and that we don't want to talk with people that have business ideas. So that's very wrong. And, so I'm here to talk about the financing section, but also to just give a little glimpse kind of behind the scenes of what you can expect from talking with a banker. So I'm going to go a little off script, and if you have already visited with a banker or know a banker that you are going to talk to about your business idea, if you could do like the little thumbs up reaction. Is that one of the reactions?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can go into your participants. You can also just put yes or no in the chat if that's easiest for you, and we'll kind of keep an eye on that and tabulate that for you.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the different ways that you can get your business idea financed. So you could do that through your savings. You may have a lot better friends and family than I do, and so you could get some financing through them. We see that often, actually. You could specifically go through equipment finance companies, so if you go straight to a dealership, mainly this applies to equipment. It could also be office equipment, things like that, copy machines, if people are still making copies these days. You can go through a bank, and most local banks, they have different tools in their tool belt. It could be what we would call conventional financing through the bank, and sometimes they can use an SBA guarantee. With that, you could look at venture capital ideas. And I talked with a business a couple weeks ago, and it was a pretty big idea, and it was a little out there, and I just had to let the person know that I really think this idea is probably better, with some venture capital funding than bank financing. And then we're seeing more people use crowdfunding, where either it's a GoFundMe or some other type. There's also some small financing, like a Kiva loan type of program or something like that. And in actuality, a lot of times I see sort of a combination of these things when people are getting started. And maybe not all at the same time, but definitely people are using lots of different options. Okay, a couple general comments. And I think this has been, I think both Lori and Cal talked about it, but you really want to obtain a commitment before you sign any kind of agreement. And, this goes back to specifically leases like Cal was talking about, because a lot of times I have seen customers maybe, or prospective customers maybe for the first time, and they've already signed a lease, and they have not talked to a bank, they don't have a commitment. So you want to just make sure you have a commitment, and you want to make sure too that you understand the scope of that commitment. So sometimes a lot of bankers will issue a letter to somebody and it's for informational purposes only or for discussion purposes only, and it's not really a strong commitment. It's just, you know, you and I have talked about something, and based on what we've talked about, this is kind of a general outline of the type of financing that we would pursue. Don't expect to get a grant. That's a little different right now because with the pandemic, we are seeing more grant opportunities, and the Small Business Development Center is a great resource for those different grants. Don't just assume you can get a bank loan. You know, you actually need to talk to someone and go through the application process, and don't expect to have 100% financing for your project. And those percentages can vary, and that's why you want to talk to a banker early. Some changes have been are occurring right now due to the pandemic. So if you talk to a banker in February, their guidelines might be a little bit different than they are today. So it's important, again, I'll probably say it about 40 times in this presentation, but to really just start a relationship with a banker, a local banker. Going back to, this is just dovetailing on what Lori was talking about, but develop your financing requests for the initial capital. We want to see sources and uses. So, you know, you're asking for funds, and then what are you going to use the funds for? We want to make sure that we really understand the projections, the expected sales, the assumptions that are going into your margins, and then, you know, what's left over at the end of the day. And we want to make sure that we're looking at that on over the course of 3 years and month by month. And so most small businesses and startup businesses need a lot more working capital than they think. And the only way that you're going to know, you know, have a good indication of what type of working capital you're going to need is to really do those month by month projections. If you are looking at things on an annualized basis, you know, if you look at the summation of 12 months, you know, maybe you only need $50,000. What you don't realize is that in June, July, and August, you're going to dip so low that maybe you need $170,000 to cover the gap between, you know, and working capital is covering the gap between money coming into your business and money going out of your business. So it's really, really helpful. That's probably one of the biggest things that I see as far as just pitfalls of new businesses is they just did not have enough working capital to start with. Summarizing your history in the industry, you know, it's you're going to have to make a really good case for yourself if you have never been a plumber and have always been an attorney like Cal, and now all of a sudden you want to start a plumbing business. We're going to have to see how you've gotten yourself ready to be a plumber and start your own business. And just describing how you use the money, and of course, how you're going to use your cash contributions, or what is going to make up your cash contributions, like where is that personal investment coming from. Let's talk a little bit about the SBA. And I mean, the SBA, who knew that working with the SBA would just be so sexy? But the SBA, which was always kind of seen as sort of a, you know, boring administration, really has jumped into action in the last 6 months. And so with lots of different programs, but they have always provided guarantees for small business loans that are originated through local banks. So the SBA, it helps small business owners to obtain more favorable financing through banks. And the way they do that is usually by allowing banks to get comfortable with less than policy compliant collateral, as well as the term of loans. So if you were to ask me about an equipment loan, more than likely a conventional bank side equipment loan is going to be, you know, maybe a 5-year payback, but with an SBA guarantee, we might be able to stretch that out to 7 or 10 years. And what that does is it lowers your payment and allows the business to keep more cash. in the business. So it allows for some longer term financing. It can offer variable rate loans. Just know that the SBA loans are also going to require that personal assets be pledged if the loan is under collateralized. Okay. The SBA, how do they do this? They do charge a fee for the guaranteed portion of the loan, and all that fee income goes into a pot and is used. And the SBA banks do take losses on SBA loans. So the way an SBA guarantee works is if you were to come to me for, let's say, $100,000 loan for your business, and we get a 50% SBA guarantee for that note, and after a few years your business goes belly up and the loan balance is still $80,000, and we try and liquidate some things, but maybe there's nothing to pay down the loan, so the bank's loss is $80,000. Well, the SBA, if we handled everything correctly, the SBA will reimburse us 50% of that loss. So instead of taking a $40,000 loss, instead of taking an $80,000 loss, the bank would take a $40,000 loss. The SBA loan, the underwriting for SBA loans is very similar, not much difference. We're going to look at personal credit history as well as the information about the business. And for some programs, 10% equity is required. For other programs, you might be looking at, up to 20%. So, but again, it's just good to talk with your banker early, because everyone's personal financial situation is a little bit different. So banks can usually get pretty creative with how they can help with financing, but we just need to talk with you and make sure that we understand everything. Actually, this bullet point is incorrect. So the SBA has been making direct loans due to the pandemic. Normally it doesn't. The SBA did offer some grant money in regards to, I guess I should have reviewed this slide better, Lori. What y'all don't know is that Lori and Cal and I have done this seminar for probably 4 years now. So, so this is a good refresher for us. So, it does not offer low interest loans. It did during COVID. This is still true. It does not allow balloon notes. So if you get a loan through the SBA, you will not be surprised. It's not going to have like an early maturity. You will know the terms for the entirety of the loan at the very beginning. Okay, and this is just going to, kind of echo what we've been hearing. It is just so important that on the front end and then throughout your business that you maintain good record keeping. You want to keep your business life, your business financial life and your personal financial life separate. You will be controlling them both, but you do not want to commingle them, and you want to keep very accurate and timely records. So it is very difficult as a banker for me to visit with someone and help them when, let's say right now we're almost November of 2020, and the most recent information they have about their business is December 31st, 2019. So that's a big gap of time that we, are not able to talk about their financial performance and understand what's been happening. So it's really important that you keep things separate, but also, keep the schedules, just keep all of that information, maintain those records so you can look back on them. Most banks are going to ask you for at least the last 2 to 3 years business tax returns and personal tax returns, as well as P&Ls and balance sheets. So you just want to make sure that those are readily available. And I've been in this line of work for about 20 years, and I can see that getting a little bit easier for people. And a lot of people have accounts set up with their accountants, and they can just send over those files, and it's real easy for us to do the financial analysis that we need. I think Cal talked about this, but I would consult an accountant at the very beginning and help get set up in a bookkeeping system. It can be costly, but I have also seen many small business owners become very familiar with QuickBooks or their accounting software. And on the front end, they visit with their CPA about what their expectations are and what they're able to do. And so I have many business owners who are very good at their bookkeeping software and usually how that's integrated with their point of sale software. And so any kind of report that I would ask for, they're able to generate that immediately. And, you know, whether that's year over year sales or how their margins have changed, you know, over the course of months or last year versus this year, they're able to generate that and not have to go through their CPA. So those relationships with the CPA can be in many different forms. And I mean, you're definitely going to pay for their services. So might be good for you to learn some things so you have control as well. Keep things separate. You know, it is, especially with any type of SBA financing, we just can't commingle. And, you know, if I've heard it once, I've heard it, you know, 17,000 times, you know, well, just, you know, just look at my bank account. You can see the money coming through there. And that's, you know, I just can't do that. You've got to keep things separate. We see people, you know, if I'm helping a customer in their business account and I just see like all these Taco Bell debits and different things like that, you know, they're using their cards for personal expenses and then they just assume they'll just sort it out on the back end, and it's really difficult. Just really get to know someone at a local bank who handles financing of small businesses. And we have a lot of good banks in the area. Arvest has a number of loan officers and business bankers that can help. But even if it's not Arvest, you know, there are a lot of people in town that want to help our small businesses. The local community bankers who have been here for a while, like myself, we have seen a lot of things, and our time is free. So I have visited with a lot of people. I can't give you tax advice, nor can I give you legal advice, but, you know, many times I'll say, you know, I've seen people do this. You might want to talk to your CPA about this or talk to your attorney about this. Finalizing all of your startup to-do list. You know, these are things, and some of this is difficult because a lot of these things kind of need to happen at the same time, and your banker will help you with this. So, and even if it's just like the beginning of an idea and you maybe don't even think that you're going to need financing, I would recommend going to visit with a banker because they can help you with the timing of some of these things as far as, you know, when to get your account set up, you know, what the bank, if you do need financing, what a bank commitment looks like. And so, you know, don't sign that lease until you get the bank commitment. They'll talk through what, you know, the process for the bank to approve your loan and how long that might take, et cetera. So again, talk with them early, and, you know, all these things are going to, especially if it's a brand new business, everything's going to be kind of happening at the same time. You're going to be finalizing your plan. You're going to be just, you know, talking with your attorney about the right legal form of your business and, you know, the tax issues and employer, all the license and permits, you know, and then also signing other agreements. And these things really are kind of happening at the same time. You know, there's sometimes a lot of draft documentation that's being sent around. So, you know, the bank is going to need your operating agreement and your articles of incorporation and things like that before it can move forward with any contracts. And sometimes we're, you know, just kind of getting things teed up and ready. And then there's like a big execution date. So
Eileen, before we move into our
Yeah.
final couple of slides, I'd love to just kind of pause here. And one of the things that I know a lot of people are kind of asking, and that we've all talked about, and your slide definitely brought up, is we're in a different era in a lot of different ways. The pandemic has brought up a lot of different things in business planning, in finance, and in legal. Well, not as much legal, but so Lori, one of the questions that came up earlier was kind of like, is it a good time to start a business right now? And what that looks like. And then that kind of segued into something that you're talking about, Eileen, is that, are there any kind of financial benefits or deficits in starting a business? Have you seen some changes that the pandemic has made that are either beneficial or not beneficial to starting a business right now?
Sure. I mean, it's definitely an unprecedented time. So I've been in lending for a long time, but I was not loaning money in the last pandemic, 100 years ago. So we definitely want to make sure that we understand all of the variables. And for some businesses, the pandemic may not be an issue. It just really depends. I will say that probably all of the banks, as well as the SBA, are requiring any type of lending proposal to have COVID related information in it. So you have to, that's another element, and Lori, that may be something that we need to add to your slides for the next one, is that you're going to need to specifically address how the business is dealing with the pandemic and the steps that it's taken. That being said, it's possible that there's not a negative impact on that industry. And so, it may not be an issue. So definitely as banks, this is all public knowledge. If you've been following financial news, banks are definitely beefing up their loan loss provisions. So we will probably see more loans go delinquent and banks take some losses. So the banks are preparing for that. The banks still need to make loans. They want to make loans. They want to reflect the need in their community. Usually, this is kind of the second wave that I have been through. So we will probably see regulators start asking for certain things, and depending on the health of the individual bank, may ask those banks to change their loan policies and things like that. But that's all information that a good loan officer will disclose at the beginning. And it is quite possible that you might describe your financial situation and your idea to them, and they will say, that just doesn't meet our bank's risk profile right now. But, usually we will refer you to someone else, or give you some ideas.
Fantastic. Lori, what are you seeing come through the door, and how are you helping people prep to meet some of those standards that Eileen is talking about? And I know that we also have some of our market research is also taking the pandemic into account. So what does that?
Yeah, so we do have market research that has baked into it the COVID impact. So that's really valuable. But I've had clients who have COVID, what's the right word that I'm looking for? That are like COVID, like not impacted. There's a better way to COVID. What?
I said COVID resistant. Like
yeah, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. They're like COVID resistant businesses that I've gotten loans on, like that, no problem, no worries. Other people I had to say, use this time to save up for a bigger down payment. Like that's what you need to do. It's just going to be a couple years before this is a realistic possibility for you, given where we are. So just save up. You're going to have a bigger down payment. This is a good business idea. I know this is a good business plan because we worked on it together. From the market research, this is a good market for it. It's just not right now. And so, and then they're like hand sanitizer, that stuff's selling through the roof. So there are certain product categories that thrive during a pandemic. And so those are some, industries that, if you can possibly get into it, then it's a great business idea. But it just, it just depends on the industry and the product. And, some people are just safe in the event or thrive in the event of a pandemic. So it just, really depends on the business.
Well, as you mentioned, Eileen, all of this happens kind of all at the same time. And we definitely are hearing a lot from you all to seek out the professional support that ASBTDC can definitely help you with, as well as direct you to other things. We want to make sure that we've answered all of your questions. We've scheduled some time in to do that. So if you unmute and want to ask the question yourself, or you're welcome to put it into the chat. You have these lovely people at your disposal right here and right now.
I would like to add one more thing.
Yeah, please.
We have Cal here, who is a small business attorney, and we have Eileen here, who is a small business commercial lender. And so one thing, like, we don't have a small business CPA here, and we don't have a small business insurance agent here, but we should, and maybe we will in the future. But one thing I would really like to encourage everyone here to do is make sure that you utilize small business professionals when you go out and get help from professionals. Not your divorce attorney, not the person that does your personal income taxes, people that do small business stuff. That's really important, because those people are really going to know what to do to help you. So I would suggest that, because some of you are going to take from this what you need, and then you're going to go do your thing, and you might not come in and visit with us. So I just want to make sure that you enlist the help of professionals that really work with small businesses.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I always say, you got into business for yourself because you make the best damn cinnamon roll. Like, it was grandma's recipe. Everyone said that, like, you're awesome at it. You should, make these and sell these. And most people did not get into business for themselves to be, figuring out what kind of tax entity they should be, or reconciling bank accounts at 2 o'clock in the morning, or figuring out financing structures and things like that. And you just don't know what you don't know. And there are a lot of people in the community that want to help. And if you have been talking about your business and you have only been hearing kind of a rosy, positive echo chamber about your idea, then you're talking to the wrong people. So you need people at the beginning who are going to listen and ask a lot of questions, and then give you critical feedback, because that's the time, and that is the least expensive time for you to make those changes to your idea. And I have seen many that did not do that, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars later, they realized that that was not a good idea.
Huge point. Thank you so much. Go ahead, and we can kind of go through the last couple of slides, make sure that we get everybody's contact information out there for sure. Thank you for doing that, Eileen. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely want you all to stay in touch with us. And again, if you have any questions, we would love for those to come to us. We'll give you some more contact information. We made this fancy dancy QR code so that you can find the asbtdc.uark.edu without any problem. And so we would love to hear from you. Let's see. So we'd love to hear from you, and follow us on social media, because that's where we post a lot of the information on all of our, oh, not seeing my slide. Thank you, ladies. Let's see where we are. Oh, it didn't kick you off. Would you stop sharing, Eileen, and I'll share the QR code. Thank you, ma'am. And we do have one class.
Nifty.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. I appreciate it. So we love hearing from all of you at any point in time. The ASBTDC is constantly doing programs like this. We really appreciate all of the time that you were able to take with us today. And this is how you can get in touch with us. We love to post on social media about our fabulous partner and our partners and our wonderful events. Some of the questions that you have coming in now, just give us a shout out. You can sign up as a client at asbtdc.uark.edu. www.uark.edu, which you can find in the QR code. Sign up for notifications, and we're also on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We'd love to see you next time, and so we really want you to stay in touch. So we'll see you very soon, and you will also, because you are an attendee, we've taken roll call, and you will get an email with these slides as well as the recording and a survey that will help us serve you better. So we appreciate all of you very much, and we will see you again next time. Thank you very much.
Amy,
Yeah.
Everybody.
can you send that final slide that you just posted to the respondents, because it has better contact information than the closing slide on the it has more accurate than the closing.
Fantastic. We will stick it in our new handy dandy slide that has all kinds of information for you. That's a great idea. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.